Good afternoon. We're going to go ahead and call today's Housing, Urban Development, and Zoning Committee meeting to order. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Cone. Alderwoman Schwitzer.
Present.
Alderwoman Keys.
Here.
Vice Chair Saunier.
Present.
Alderman Browning. Alderman Aldridge. Chair Clerk Hubard.
Here.
Alderman Cone. Alderman Browning. Alderman Aldridge. We have four present.
Thank you. We don't have any minutes to approve. And I want to make sure I thank our committee members for their intentional efforts to pull together today as we continue to respond to our constituents, our beloved city's needs in tornado relief as best we can down here at the Board of Aldermen. With that being said, there are some members that are toggling right now between another committee hearing and will be joining us. So what we're going to go ahead and do, I'm going to turn it over to our Vice Chair Saunier so that we can begin with the board bills presentations. Thank you.
Okay, and with that, Alderwoman Clark Hubard, Chairwoman Clark Hubard, you are recognized to speak to Board Bill number 28.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Madam Clerk, can you please read the summary for Board Bill 28?
Board Bill 28, introduced by Alderwoman Shameen Clark Hubbard, an ordinance recommended by the Board of Estimate and Apportionment, appropriating a sum of $4,999,526 in Community Development Block Grant Fund to the Community Development Administration, authorizing and directing the Director of Community Development Administration to execute contracts as may be necessary to expend funds, authorizing and directing the comptroller to issue warrants thereupon, the city treasury, and containing emergency and severability clause.
All right, Madam Clerk, he sent the presentation to the BOA clerk. Okay, so we'll go ahead, absolutely. I'll take these back, thank you. Go ahead and bring up Director Feffer here to begin with his presentation. I'll pass out these handouts in the interim.
Thank you very much, Alderwoman Clark Hubbard. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for convening on such short notice to consider these bills. They're both pretty
Director
straightforward.
Feffer, please introduce yourself.
My name is Noel Feffer. I serve as Executive Director of the Community Development Administration. Thank you, Alderwoman Saunier.
Thank you.
With that, these are both pretty straightforward, so I'll go over them pretty briefly and then invite any questions from the committee or the public. But we'll start with Board Bill 28, a tornado disaster relief appropriation. And this appropriates $5 million as part of a broader $7.4 million substantial amendment to redirect CDBG community development block grants to support tornado recovery efforts. Where these funds come from, the $5 million in unappropriated available funds come from 2018 to 2021 CDBG allocations from HUD that were in excess of that which was projected by the city and appropriated by the city in 2018 through 2021. We discovered that these funds were available during our consolidated planning process. I want to pause to note that the presentation up on the screen here is our budget presentation, not today's presentation, which was emailed to the BOA clerk and Alderwoman Clark Hubbard earlier today.
I don't see.
I'll move on to just note that in addition to these $5 million in funds, there are $2.4 million which are being redirected through this substantial amendment as well, but not appropriated in this bill. So what are the uses of these funds? The answer is three buckets: household assistance, 1.4 million; debris and tree removal, 3 million; and home repair, 3 million. The way we arrived at these figures is that household assistance is clearly an extraordinarily urgent need, but we are capped by HUD with respect to how much funding we can provide to what are called public services. That's services which serve people, including relocation assistance, household assistance, food assistance, senior services, etc. So that 1.4 million is the maximum. It's 19% is the statutory cap per Congress, the maximum that we can allocate towards household assistance. And then in dialogue with the Emergency Operations Center, understanding their needs, looking at also what the HUD eligible uses were and what we could deploy most quickly and with minimal administrative burden, we decided to split the remainder of the funds 50-50 towards home repair and debris and tree removal. So that's how we arrived at those figures. In terms of next steps, we are moving forward with a substantial amendment to the consolidated plan as required by HUD. That was actually noticed in the paper today in the St. Louis American. We will hold a public hearing as required on June 12th. We are also submitting a request to HUD for several waivers. The mayor is actually sending that to Secretary Scott Turner later this week. We are requesting a total of 5 waivers, including one that will shorten the timeline for public notice from 30 days to 5 days. As well as another one which will, if granted, accelerate the environmental review process for these funds, because that's one of the things that will be most significant as we work to deploy these funds. We currently have to conduct an environmental review for every single household, and if we can get an exemption under 58.34.810, we can significantly accelerate funding. And then we will simultaneously be moving forward in contracting for these funds. We are going to be utilizing our existing home repair construction management provider, Mission St. Louis. That's something that we can move forward without further procurement because that's a subrecipient agreement, not a goods and services or professional services agreement, and they are our current provider. We are also working with the Emergency Operations Center and experts, contracting experts to prepare a request for bids for contractors. That's for the debris and tree removal, where we are looking to contract directly with contractors as opposed to with third parties. And then finally, we will work with the Department of Human Services in the St. Louis area Agency on Aging to identify subrecipients. The thing to note for that work for household assistance is that the priorities are going to depend in part on the other funds that are available and what gaps remain. And in particular, whether or not a presidential disaster declaration is made and we can expect FEMA assistance or not. The strategy is going to be different depending on that outcome. On the next page is just a really high-level summary of the storm impact for your context, including a map of the tornado path and impacted area, an estimate of up to 16,000 parcels affected, including an estimated 10,000 damaged buildings, at least $1 billion in property damage, not including utility infrastructure, sidewalks, fences, landscaping, power or light poles, vehicle damage, damage to personal belongings, or for that matter, what will likely be a substantial health impact. We have significant food insecurity. Food is definitely going to be one of the priorities for household assistance, as we have thousands of households currently relying on daily meals and hundreds of damaged businesses as well. There's an additional slide that provides more details on our home repair program, but I'm not going to go through this in detail unless the committee has additional questions about it. We can certainly go through it in more detail. So with that, I'll pause for any questions.
We will just go through the committee and committee order for questions. I know some of our other members are still on another meeting, so Alderwoman Schwitzer.
And before we do that, we're still trying to get, we did not find the email, so he's working on getting that email. And then I also want to let the committee members know that Policy Director Milberg is on Zoom as well. If you wanted to hear from her first on any context, or do you want to just go into questions, just let us know.
Do you want to go into a brief recess until she arrives?
She's on.
Okay.
She's on now.
Okay. Then we can hear from her.
You bumped it like that. Okay.
Hi, Director Milberg. We can see you.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Casey Milberg, Policy Director at Mayor Spencer's office. First and foremost, several thank yous in order. Thank you first and foremost to the committee for making time for this hearing today. I know it is not your usual, but as per usual, you are tremendous partners in all aspects of the city's response and recovery and relief efforts. So thank you so much for your time and your careful consideration today. Next, thank you so much to CDA Director Noel Feffer. Shortly after the tornado, the city, of course, began starting a very thorough review of all of its coffers, and CDA certainly put forward some wonderful suggestions. Included in those suggestions were these funds, and they moved very quickly to start putting together the board bills and documentation and suggestions for the waivers that the mayor would need to submit to HUD in order to help facilitate these next steps. So thank you to Noel and all of the team over at CDA. I know it was a team effort, and we're tremendously grateful for this. Then finally, of course, thank you so much to Alderwoman Clark Hubard for jumping right in. As soon as we identified these funds being available to get them moving. And then, of course, to the President's office for helping us facilitate this filing. Really just so many thank yous. It's important that we get as much money moving as we can. As everyone here knows, we still do not have a major disaster declaration. We don't have a clear answer yet as to why. We know that the town in Kentucky that was hit by the same storm system that the city of St. Louis was hit with has received their major disaster declaration. So we are continuing as alongside our state and federal partners to keep advocating, providing more data, providing more information. But in the meantime, we are continuing to proceed with moving all forms of relief that we certainly can, including this. So we certainly welcome the questions. We're grateful for the time, the support, the quick mobilization, and everyone's commitment to doing as much as we can as quickly as we can for our community in need. And I think with that, I will go ahead, hit pause, and let the committee decide if they have any questions for Director Feffer, for the bill sponsor, or for myself.
Thank you, Director Milberg. Alderwoman Schwitzer.
Thank you so much. I appreciate this presentation and the quick work putting it together. In the first page of the board bill, it says that during the course of preparing the city's 5-year consolidated plan, the CDA discovered the city's CDBG awards were larger than the sums appropriated. Can you speak a little bit more about that? When was that discovered, and just the process of that not having been allocated in the past?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it was certainly surprising to our team as well when we discovered that as part of a regular review of HUD allocations and commitments as part of our 5-year consolidated plan. The purpose of the consolidated plan is to do this deep dive, assess the work that's occurred, and the work that is planned for the coming 5 years. So as a part of this, we basically created a table of every single contractual commitment and every single appropriation and lined everything up. And what we saw is that the HUD formula awards between 2018 and 2021 were in excess of appropriated funds.
So is that money that was sitting with the city or sitting with HUD and we hadn't pulled down? Is that
money is sitting with HUD? The way that CDBG funds work in general, and the why this occurred this way, is that we appropriate the funds here before we submit the action plan and before we enter into the grant agreement with HUD. And in fact, so HUD requires us to submit the action plan 45 days before the beginning of the program year. So November 15th of, say, 2024 for the 2025 year. But that program year's budget often isn't appropriated until March or April. And so we don't know the final dollar amounts of of what is going to be awarded based on that federal congressional appropriation until after we do the appropriation and submit the action plan. And so that's why between 2018 and 2021, there were assumptions made, and those assumptions wound up being less. Those projections wound up being less, significantly so in 2018, $2.5 million. Since then, we've started to err more on the side of caution and essentially expanding the available funds, assuming that program income will buttress whatever the difference is, which it has. And so that's how we proceed moving forward. It's not going to happen again, but that is what we discovered between 2018 and 2021.
Okay. Thank you for that explanation, and I appreciate the discovery of it because we never want to leave any money on the table when it comes to our city, how much needs we have before this and after this, and So regarding the few different buckets, I really appreciate you explaining the substantial amendment piece because I was looking at what the board bill said and then how much money was being appropriated, and obviously the difference of a few $1 million. So that's money that we haven't gotten in yet or haven't, and you said their application is in, there's a hearing coming up. Explain that a little bit clearer for me because that was something I was tripping over.
Another great question, and thank you for the opportunity to explain it. That $2.4 million is money that has been appropriated and was contractually obligated and committed to projects that have since either closed out without spending all the monies or do not anticipate spending further funds. So these are monies that don't need to be appropriated because they already were appropriated, but do need to be re-obligated from one contract to another.
So we don't talk about in this bill where that money is coming from, though.
That's right, because that money has already been appropriated. That will be detailed in our substantial amendment, which will list exactly the contracts where it's being pulled out from and where it is being allocated to.
And we will receive that at some point.
Yes, we'll certainly pass it on, but it doesn't require any legislative action.
Okay, that's important. Okay, thank you very much. And then for the different tornado emergency home repair, I think it's a great idea to keep working with the organizations that are already doing such a good job. Mission St. Louis is incredible. They do a great job with the home repair programs that they manage already. So do you anticipate that the application that people will be filling out will be very similar to the one that already exists? Or are you anticipating them having some sort of tornado-specific, completely separate bucket, which I imagine would be the case here?
Another great question, and something
you don't have to compliment every question.
It's true, because these are all the things that we've been talking about, thinking about. And so we were just thinking about this with our team over the past week or so, and what we've concluded is that we want a single universal intake form that will include questions such as, were you impacted by the tornado? Were you impacted also by the flood, the 2022 flood? Because there's a bucket of funding where we can repair tornado damage provided that the home was impacted by the flood. And then that'll direct folks into 3 lists. Those 3 lists are folks who were impacted by the tornado, folks who were impacted by the flood, and folks who were impacted by, or who were not impacted by either. Then off of those 3, there's different sources of funds that can go to each one and different rules that apply to each one. So then yes, the application will be different, but we're going to have a single consolidated intake form that will apply to all of them.
Okay, so at least the intake piece is simplified for the organization. I didn't know about the percentage for household assistance that had to have been in, but I know that you said you split it half and half for home repair and cleanup. Can you explain a little bit more about why that was chosen to be that way?
Yeah, just in discussion with the Emergency Operations Center and the teams on the ground, we know that there's extraordinary needs. And again, the final set of priorities is difficult to prioritize when we don't know what all the other resources are. And so the recommendation was to put some money into what's immediately needed today for debris cleanup, knowing also that we are trying to mobilize other sources for that as well, including about $2.5 million in ARPA funds. But then also creating money so that we can start scaling up our home repair program, knowing that in order to meet the need, we over the last few years have scaled our home repair program from about $2 million a year to $5.5 million a year. We're going to need to scale it another 5 or 10-fold, frankly, to meet the extraordinary need And so we need to start building that capital stack, including this $3 million of CDBG, $7.8 million of CDBG-DR, any other funding, especially local funding that may not be subject to environmental review. And so because we know that home repair funds are actually currently for ARPA fully committed, we know we need that additional money just to keep the program rolling and moving.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate all the time that you've taken to answer my great question. Sorry, just
They are.
had to teach you. And I would like to be added as a co-sponsor to this board bill, Madam Clerk. Thank you so much.
noted.
Alderwoman Keys?
Thank you for all your work on this. I don't have any questions at this time. And I would also move that we embank this board bill. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any objections? Or Madam Clerk, can you call the roll? Do we need, it's not many of us here, so.
Alders is online, so we have to do a roll call.
Okay.
Alderman Cone. Alderwoman Schweitzer. Alderwoman Keys.
Aye.
Vice Chair Sonier.
Aye.
Alderman Browning. Alderman Aldridge.
Aye.
Chair Clark Hubbard. Alderman Cone. Alderman Browning. We have 5 aye votes.
Thank you, and with that, we have in-bank Board Bill 28. Congratulations, Alderwoman Clark Hubbard. Alderman Aldridge, I see you online. Do you have any questions? No questions? Okay. I did have a question. Just for Healthy Home Repair Program, I see that that's at 80% AMI. Is that the limit for that program?
It is. For CDBG, the limit is 80% AMI. For CDBG disaster recovery, it will be 120% AMI.
But since this is not specifically, wasn't for those purposes, we have to stick.
These funds are CDBG dollars.
Yeah.
So the regulatory limit is 80% AMI.
Okay. And were you planning to continue your presentation, or should I just ask you all my questions now?
I certainly can continue my presentation on Board Bill 20.
As another bill? Okay. Well, I think that completes this portion. Did you want to do any closing, Alderwoman Clark Hubbard?
No, I didn't, unless anyone had any questions, any additional questions for me. Of course, if Director Milberg had any additional context she wanted to add. In closing, I did just want to offer my gratitude.
And I'm sorry, Alderwoman Clark Hubbard, before you close, I want to make sure we didn't have any public comment in the room or online.
We have none.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Again, just following up with my gratitude as well for the work that's been done here and the work that we'll be able to do to build capacity in these programs. Thank you to the Department of Human Services and CDA, and of course the Mayor's office, and with them coming together with our office here to pull this together so quickly on behalf of our constituents. I just want to make sure my gratitude is shared as well. So with that, I will close and ask for your favorable consideration and due pass recommendation for Bill 20.
I will take a motion.
I move that we pass Board Bill 28 with the due pass recommendation.
Second.
Previous roll.
Any objections? Hearing no objections, we'll do previous roll.
All right. With that, with Madam Vice Chair, if I can go ahead with Board Bill 29.
Yeah.
Okay. Madam Clerk, can you read the summary for Board Bill 29?
Board Bill 29, introduced by Alderwoman Shamin Clark Hubbard, an ordinance recommended by the Board of Estimate and Apportionment authorizing the mayor to enter into and execute a grant with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development for the receipt of pathways to removing obstacles to housing funding, appropriating the sum of $6,999,198 in pro-housing funds to the Community Development Administration, authorizing and directing the Director of Community Development Administration to execute contracts as may be necessary to expend funds, authorizing and directing the comptroller to issue warrants thereon upon the city treasury and containing an emergency and severability clauses.
Thank you again. With me for Board Bill 29, I have Director Feffer.
Thank you very much. This bill is quite straightforward as well, and the timing was auspicious. We received our award letter from HUD on May 28th, which allows us to move forward with this appropriation of funds. This is the Pathways to Reducing Obstacles to Affordable Housing HUD Grant Program. It's a new grant program, a competitive grant program, which is intended to remove barriers to affordable housing. And so back in 2023, the city convened an interdepartmental team, CDA, the planning department, SLDC, the building division, and the mayor's office to apply. We applied in 2023. We were competitive. Unfortunately, it was dramatically oversubscribed program. We were not selected, but we did a debrief with HUD, which told us we liked your application, apply again, provided some feedback on some additional points we could pick up. We applied again on October 15th of 2024, and this time we're awarded our full $7 million request. The grant period runs from February 2025 to September 2030, so we are excited to get to work in deploying these funds. And there is, thankfully, even though this was submitted well in advance of the tornado, of course, significant alignment between the work that is proposed in our plan and what will be needed, including the fact that $3.25 million are set aside for the development of housing in the Ville and Greater Ville. I'll talk more about that in a moment, but there were three core objectives of our pro-housing application that, again, we came together as a city to identify, and also subject to iterative public comment and input. And the first is updating our zoning and land use regulation, including a zoning code overhaul to promote density and mixed-use development. And this is leveraging another $1 million of ARPA funds that are already committed towards this large effort that builds on the strategic land use plan, and all of this work is being led by the planning department. Updating our historic district standards to balance affordability, climate resilience, and preservation goals. Creating an affordable housing design book. This is really a best practice that I'm so excited for, where we can have a library of pre-approved designs that developers can turn to that can both reduce their architectural and design costs and accelerate their projects, because the book will be successful insofar as we can get certainly CDA, the planning department, but most particularly the building division, to agree that these designs are pre-approved and do not require significant additional review. And so that will accelerate approval processes. And it's a best practice that cities across the country have been investing in. Updating our affordability policies, that's really important for CDA. Our affordability policies currently, I think, leave something to be desired in that they do not promote long-term mixed income communities, and we want to strengthen them. And particularly right now, here's the key thing. We currently have one-size-fits-all affordability policies for the entire city, and what we really need are affordability policies that are tailored to the markets across the city. And then we have mapping our development processes and improving our development processes, because we know building in the city of St. Louis isn't as easy as it should be, and there is work that can be done to accelerate and reduce those barriers. So that's all in objective one of kind of the regulatory and policy work. Objective two is about developing housing and accelerating our housing production process and reducing costs. And what's fundamentally being proposed here, which HUD was very excited about, is flipping our traditional housing production process on its head. Because typically our housing funding cycles are reactive. It says, we have this much money available, developers, you apply to tell us what you want to build. And each developer applies for a different site, and it's not very competitive, right? Because every developer has their own site that they're proposing, and if we want to develop a given building or a given area, we have to go with that developer. What we're talking about doing here is flipping that and saying the city will define the target geography, the target building, or the target blocks. The city defines the budget, and the city defines what we want to see there. And we do this, of course, in engagement and dialogue with the public and the community. And this is exactly the development process that more sophisticated cities, particularly European cities and others, follow, where essentially that drives competition. Because now the city's saying, we have $3 million to do this development, and this is what we want to see here. Now you, private sector, you all apply and show us how much you can do with this budget in this location, right? And who can deliver the best proposal. And so it's more competitive. It should reduce costs and also accelerate our approvals on our end, because we can run those traps when we are defining what we want to see in the location, such that it aligns with the existing zoning requirements. So we went through that process with the planning department, with SLDC, with the community, and we identified a target area in the Ville along Garfield, Aldine, just north of MLK, and we released that. We met with the neighborhood planning committee for input. We proposed 4 different sites and asked which one of those was the community's top priority, and we issued that RFP back in March in anticipation, because we knew we'd been awarded these funds back in January, but we were waiting for HUD to move forward. And we know housing development takes a long time, so we decided to start the process early. And so that's out now. We extended that deadline from June 13th to July 14th in light of the tornado, because we want to allow local grassroots developers to apply. And we're really excited to see those proposals and develop this housing. So that's objective 2. Objective 3 is expanding capacity and improving communication, and involves, we talk a lot about these big strategic planning processes. What we know is really needed with housing is an ongoing planning process, an ongoing dialogue between the city, developers, and community. And so that's what this will support, as well as positions to support engagement and administration. And finally, the budget is really set forth in what we applied to HUD for, but includes that $750,000 for the zoning code overhaul, $400,000 for the affordable housing design book, $60,000 for development process mapping and improvement, $3.25 million for infill housing development, $200,000 for that affordability policies update, $85,000 for that ongoing action planning, needs assessment, engagement, and communications, $898,000 for CDA staffing. That includes a program manager and a small developer liaison. $1,080,000 for the planning department staffing needs, including 3 positions, and staffing for the SLDC citywide housing strategist, $276,000. So next steps include entering into subrecipient agreements with the planning department and SLDC, and reviewing applications to our infill housing notice of funding availability, which closes on July 14th. Thank you, and happy to answer any questions or turn it back to the Alderwoman and Policy Director Milberg.
Thank you so much, Director Feffer, and thank you for that detail. And I wanted to make sure, I'm glad you remembered that we wanted to share that context about the RFP being extended to developers. And I love the intentionality that you all put in that to make sure that we have that available and open for our local developers. I didn't know if Director Milberg wanted to add any additional context before we go into questions. She said she may have gotten kicked out, so she may need to be moved back as the panelist. Thank you. And for anyone that's watching that is interested in that RFP, they just go to the CDA website.
Hello again, Director Milberg. Nice to have you back. You can proceed with your comments.
Thank you very much. And I apologize. Some of the internet over here at Emergency Command can be a little spotty, but if that's the worst that happens to us, we'll take it. Again, just want to express a tremendous amount of gratitude for our city team, CDA. I know Planning Division was so involved in this. I know we had our housing strategist, Dylan Holliam from SLDC, who participated in putting this together and submitting this competitive application for this new program. And, you know, I think that it speaks, it's a testament to the thoughtfulness of those individuals, that it has been able to be so flexible and so spot on to be responsive, even in this time of uncharted waters and immense need, that it is something that did reflect enough of the need of the city going into this, that it can be so responsive in this moment. So I do want to take a moment to recognize that, and again, just express our tremendous gratitude for everyone who got these funds to this point, from brainstorming stage to the nitty gritty of application to pushing through and building out these details. And then of course to the whole CDA team for, again, putting this bill together under pretty quick turnaround, and all of you for making time to consider it and getting it moving. It's smart, it's intentional, it's thoughtful, it's holistic, and it's able to be responsive to a whole range of needs to help set all of our communities, but especially the impacted communities in the impacted area up for long-term success. So just our heartfelt gratitude from the mayor's office to all of you for that, and our thanks for your consideration and hopefully your support of this important bill.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. With that, we can go in committee order. Alderwoman Schweitzer.
Thank you so much. I appreciate this bill as well. So the Ville and Greaterville were chosen before the tornado happened. Wow, okay. And that is an area that was chosen because of something on its economic justice scorecard.
Yeah, a lot of it was related to the investment that the city's making in the Monarch. And
I'm sorry, in what?
in the Monarch facility on 3940 MLK, also known previously as the Killark Electric Building. And there was a shared desire among the planning department, SLDC, to, as we work to invest in this anchor in North St. Louis, and in particular a workforce development hub, that we would need additional housing around there. And so this money actually braids with additional $3.25 million of ARPA funds, which were already committed towards the development of innovative housing alongside the Monarch. And what we essentially realized, and that includes, we have proposals for 3D printed homes, container homes, and modular homes currently. And what we realize is that by putting these resources together and looking as well at the work that we're already investing in with For the Ville and Hope in the Ville and Northside Community Housing, that we could stitch together and really bring back whole blocks, and not just blocks, but series of blocks, such that we could uplift the geography between the Monarch facility and Sumner High School. And that's basically the goal here, is to activate and invest in housing along that geography, such that we can bring back density and support the revitalization of the.
Thank you, because when you were talking about, specific buildings or challenging developers around a specific area, I wasn't sure if in this case you had buildings in mind, or if you were more looking for a partnership between the Affordable Housing Design Book and specific blocks, where that would be working together, I guess, is a challenge.
I definitely think there's a connection between this housing competition and the design book, and essentially the relationship is that we'll take the designs that we receive, right, and that we invest in, and put those into the design book. And honestly, that's something we want to start doing in general with a lot of the housing that we invest in, is adding into that agreement when we do choose to subsidize the development of housing by 50-60%, that one of the things that the developer provides is our ability to use those designs.
No, I was just about to ask how you were going to get that, intellectual property part figured out. So you've thought of it. That's great. When do you anticipate those applications starting?
The applications for the housing are, that application is open and closing on July 14th.
Okay, so it's moving quickly. All right, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I'd also like to be added as a co-sponsor to Board Bill 29. Thank you.
So noted.
Thank you. Alderwoman Keys.
I would also like to move that we embank Board Bill 29 as well.
Second, previous roll.
Any objections? Hearing no objections, we have embanked Board Bill 29. Is Alderman Aldridge on the call, or any other Alder on the call?
Alderman Aldridge is.
Do you have any questions, Alderman? Okay, and he just let me know he doesn't. Okay, great. I just had a question about the time, the infill. I know you said that the notice of funding is going to go out on July 14th, or the
No,
NOFA?
the notice of funding availability is out and will close on July 14th.
Okay, and can you talk a little bit more about the timeline for that and what that infill housing is?
Yes, so we are going to close that application and start reviewing applications on July 14th. And so it'll probably take us a few months to review. Frankly, we're going to be prioritizing LIHTC projects for review first because of that upcoming MHDC deadline. But hopefully we'll have awards identified. Well, actually, the pro-housing process will be slower because one of the things that we've committed to the community is that once we review and kind of review the applications for eligibility and completeness, we're going to take a short list of eligible and complete development proposals back to that neighborhood planning committee for them to review and interview the developers. So it's going to be actually a slower process than our typical process, but that's kind of the purpose of this, is to develop new, more proactive and community-driven processes.
And you said for private developers, are community development corporations or those type of entities also eligible for this?
Absolutely, yes. Nonprofit or private developers are eligible to apply.
Okay. And then I wanted to ask you a little bit more about your affordable housing design book. I've actually never heard that until you just mentioned it, but it sounds like a good idea. Is the idea that it would be sort of like a database or a software that someone could log in if they were looking to affordable housing, but maybe struggling with the affordable models that make it reachable, and the city has some designs that have kind of already been vetted that they could go with?
Yes, exactly. I think of it as a library where, and yes, it would exist digitally, but where you go in and you can explore different designs, options for housing, and they'll say an estimated budget, and also critically the neighborhoods of the city and the zones of the city where you can develop this house without any kind of special additional approvals required. And so this project is being led by the planning department because it does require such deep coordination with zoning in particular, and really excited to bring it to fruition through this funding.
And the zoning code overhaul, this is just helping to fund the overall zoning code overhaul that they're doing. Do you know, funding wise, is this enough to kind of meet the rest of their need, or is it anticipated that they'll need more?
I don't want to speak for the planning department, but my understanding is between these funds and the ARPA funds that they already have committed towards this should be sufficient to fully fund the project. But of course, we know that project scopes and budgets can change over time as well.
Yes, and then I saw that this also includes funding for a new position that I haven't heard of, a staffing citywide housing specialist. I know that is for SLDC, but do you want to just share a little bit more information about the goals of that position?
Sure, and it's not a new position, actually. It is currently occupied by Dylan Hall, who's done excellent work in that role and is currently in the heart of EOC operations, helping respond to extraordinary housing needs in this moment. But Dylan has worked at SLDC for over a year now and is doing great work in that role, and was instrumental in the preparation of this pro-housing application.
So this is to extend that role or to create another?
Yes, it's to extend that role. It doesn't fully fund it. It funds, I think, I would have to review the budget, but I think 30% or so of the role. And it's to provide additional support.
Thank you. That completes my questions. I did just want to really thank the mayor's office, Alderwoman Clark Hubbard, yourself, Noel Feffer. I know the president's office, I know a lot of people have been working on this, but especially you, Alderwoman. I know, I can't imagine what it's like to have you and Alderwoman Keys to have to serve wards and have to respond to the level of need that is there with residents, and then also have to balance that with our legislative duties and new bills and processes. And so you have my commitment anytime we call a meeting or a hearing, if it is to meet the needs that our cities have while we have residents living in tents and tarps on their roof. I will always clear anything I have and anything I could do to support any of you all as impacted alders, whatever needs to be moved around, scheduling wise. I'm 100% prepared to do that in any other way that I can, support you. And I hope that you're taking care of yourself while you're balancing all of these, yourself and Alderwoman Keys, while you guys are just I really can't imagine all that you're having to balance right now. So I really take my hats off to you all.
Thank you so much. Did you want to speak to that, Alderwoman Keith? It's hard to speak on it, isn't it? You just got to walk these shoes.
Yes, it's a lot.
It's a lot.
And, but, I always like to tell people I'm built for this. And so I think we're built for what we are having to deal with right now. I keep telling people, thank you, Lord, I won't complain. And we just continue to do what we're put here to do. And I don't necessarily see it as anything that is extraordinary. This is the job, and this is what we signed up for. And so we are answering the call. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think we can, you can close us. Oh, is there any
We
public
have
comment?
one speaker. Chris Wilcox.
Okay. Just come up. I saw you already signed in, so just come up and say your name and the ward that you're from in 3 minutes.
Hi, my name is Chris Wilcox. I'm in the 14th Ward. So I had some general comments about the tornado relief and the development priorities. So I wanted to thank the board for approving additional funds for the impacted fund and making sure it can be used for emergency. I think that's going to be really important, particularly now. I think there's some important things to look out for when we're talking about tornado relief and what development goes into it, making sure that the usual thing that happens in a disaster where people have lost their homes, especially if they're lower income, don't end up being an opportunity for developers to pick up those properties on the cheap and renovate them, and usually for more upper income rentals. I know it's a very common phenomenon I've seen personally, where even buildings that are relatively affordable that get renovated and they raise the rent, and even just in my own personal experience, like my sister, when she was moving out of her apartment a bit ago, because there was mold on the roof, and that was before the mold ordinance got passed. So thankfully that's on the books now. But even while we were packing up, there was someone who just walked up to us and asked if we knew who owned the building, if they could purchase it. So these kinds of flipping of properties is happening all over the place. You see increasingly, like with some of the few buildings that are sort of affordable now, or this is happening too. I think it's good to prioritize LIHTC. I think there's even going to be some, even LIHTC is not sufficient for a lot of people to be able to afford homes. So we want to make sure that it's available for as affordable as possible at the lowest possible point, and that people have appropriate support. So those are some of the things I wanted to, hopefully that we stay vigilant about, especially not having the same kind of disaster capitalism happen ever after a storm like this. We already have a lot of problem with that in terms of developers mishandling real estate in the city. So hopefully we keep that in mind while we're approving projects and don't subsidize the problem, essentially.
Thank you for your commentary.
Absolutely.
Alderwoman Clark Hubbard, you're recognized to close.
Thank you. With that, I ask for your favorable consideration and do pass recommendation for Board Bill 29.
I would take a motion.
I move to pass Board Bill 29 with the due pass recommendation.
Second?
Previous roll.
Any objections? No objections to previous row. We have passed Board Bill 29.
Okay, we will move forward in the agenda to our discussion item number 1, the impacted tenants form application. Alderman Aldridge, you're recognized as we review and discuss the application form for tenants in the tornado disaster impacted areas as outlined in your Board Bill 23 and related disaster legislation.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. I think all alders received the applications as well as it's in the drive First, before talking about the application, and this would be the application for the impacted tenants funds, as we get this program set up and get the funds out the door, this would be the application people will have to fill out to be able to get those funds. I want to first thank Ms. Valerie Russell, who is the Deputy Director of the Human Services, as well as the Mayor's Office, Ms. Milberg, Casey. I feel like we say the last name wrong sometimes. Ms. Casey, the President's Office, and the Mayor's Office all coming together really quickly. As we know, we passed the bill earlier this week, I believe. The days are running past me, if not last week, to make sure that there was language in the Impacted Tenants Fund bill that, thanks for passing the baton over, Alderwoman Clark Hubbard passed to include language that also said that tornado victims can be able to tap into this fund. Part of the language in the legislation says that we at the board or the HUD's committee must approve the application. So in front of you is, again, the application that we would like to get approved so we can start the program. Just will highlight some of the things. It's the applicant's information as a first, last name, email, phone number, the reasoning why they are applying for this. So if their building and unit is condemned because originally passed it, we just said if you live in a condemned, or if your building has become condemned, that you'd be able to get this fund, but we also included the national disaster part, and we asked for the event and the date of it, as well as the impacted address on the lease. So you have to be a holder or the name on the lease to be able to apply for these funds, and mention how many bedrooms are in the unit, when the lease started, when the lease ended, and then the landlord or property manager information, or if it's a property owner, if it's different from the actual landlord or property manager, and then the signature towards the bottom, as well if there's anybody under the age of 18. We also ask if you have already found housing and if you'll be a new resident to the city. Again, this is as we are moving very quickly in this disaster to get things out the door. This is one of the requirements or stipulations that was needed for the Impacted Tenants Fund bill to make sure that we have an application, but also is approved by the HUD's committee. I will also open it up if Ms. Valerie wanted to say anything from the Department of Human Services. She has been working email after email after email, editing and changing, and just working with us to get this application right and together.
Thank you so much, Ms. Russell, and thank you again for the intentional time that you dove right in on this. Everybody is playing a role in this response, and yours is a very important role. And we just appreciate, again, the time and the commitment that you did, not only to flag things for us, but now to go ahead and escalate it so that we can get it moving for our residents.
Thank you very much. Valerie Russell, Deputy Director, Department of Human Services. The information that Alderman Aldridge provided was, in fact, what is on the current draft of the impact application. I do want to point out, however, based upon what Director Feffer indicated, that there may be some CDBG funds that could go to household assistance. We may need to do one more iteration or revision of this application to make sure that we are not going to change the application after so many months. The CDBG funds will require that we get income information from individuals and a couple of other points. We can put those back in the application and provide to the HUD's committee so that you can review it before the application is released. But again, we don't want to be in a position to ask some of the tenants some information and then later require others to give information that earlier applicants were not asked to provide. The process for this application will be that individuals who were identified in the early ordinance, individuals whose homes had been condemned by the building division, they will also be eligible for the funds, and individuals who are impacted by this disaster would be eligible for the funds. So we've got two different pools of individuals and different layers of review of the applications for that point. In addition, we're going to be reviewing various databases to confirm that the individuals are in properties that were in the ward, in those areas that they reported some damage, that the building division has done an inspection and has determined that they have a red or yellow tag. We are going to be looking at the database that the Vacancy Collaborative and SLDC CDA have provided to us on where buildings were vacant and were not occupied at a time, so we can verify the addresses that people are going to be putting on the applications. So we have a variety of steps and individuals who are going to be cross-referencing those databases, as well as an entity who we contracted with in December of 2024 using ARPA funds, and that is Employment Connection. If there are any questions that you might have, I can go over also the award amounts that we anticipate giving to individuals. It's based upon the 2025 FMR. So a one-bedroom unit would be $984, two bedrooms, $1,215, three bedrooms, $1,570, four bedrooms, $1,806, and so on. I don't have to stress that there are individuals who need more money than this. And so our efforts are going to be to make sure they understand what this is for, why it's being provided. And I need guidance from this board to make certain that we are not, and the individuals receiving these funds aren't going to be challenged. If they don't directly use it for a deposit on another unit, they have other expenditures and needs that they have immediately. We will explain why they're receiving this money and that it was in the ordinance so that they can do a down payment equivalent to what the unit was that they were occupying before the condemnation or the disaster struck. Are there any questions?
Thank you for that context. And there's additional information. I know some organizations are doing a good job with communicating with our tenants as well about their rights, right? When their buildings were condemned or if they're displaced out of their buildings, I think it's important for us, coupled with that, with any of these tools we have, hopefully it'll be able to move them forward, to your point, so they're not stretched trying to use something for one thing that's intended for another thing. So thank you for that context. We'll continue to share that. I'll go ahead and open up for questions first and then see how you want to proceed. Okay. Alderwoman Schwitzer.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the information about how you'll check on whether someone actually is in a unit that has been condemned in some way or was vacant or whatever. Regarding the disaster and the red tag and yellow tag. So there's a database that exists of all the buildings that are in each category, so that wouldn't be something that would be debatable from that.
There are various databases. The building division is going to allow our staff to look through their database on the condemnations and the other information of what they've tagged. We have a database that is being compiled by UMSL on Airtable that currently has over 7,000 names and the reports of those individuals who are in properties and the amount of damage. It also allows us to look for alternative phone numbers and contact information and a way to contact them to let them know about the availability of these funds. We are concerned about releasing a broad-based announcement that applications are available, because in our experience with rental assistance over the last 5 years, we will get applications from everyone who wants this type of assistance, which requires us to then spend hours and days and months reviewing and then indicating to an individual that they're not eligible.
Right.
So,
well, there's certainly no lack of need in the city for people who are experiencing this, who have either experienced something where their housing is no longer something that they can occupy through no fault of their own, whether it's something that was in existence before the tornado or is in existence now. But I do think that making sure that you're able to verify that the person is who they say they are, lived where they said they did, and they did have that, is really important, because I think we saw with incredibly well-intentioned American Rescue Plan Act programs that if there is anyone who comes and takes advantage of it, it makes everyone look bad. It makes the program look bad. People challenge the reason for the program to exist in the first place. And I think we can all say today very easily that this is absolutely needed. But 8-10 months from now, if there's a certain amount of fraud that has existed, people are going to challenge why we did this. And so, you know, getting it right at the beginning, I think I've certainly learned that from the American Rescue Plan Act process, how important it is to get the application right, to get the information right, to have multiple ways to verify that this is the person that they say they are, that their building was affected the way they say it was. It's very interesting, I think, that you point out the amount of money that will be available per unit, and that it could go to something else besides housing. And I'm not sure how the public will respond to that if this is for housing, but I understand that, you know, cash is fungible. If, you know, they have to spend money on housing, anyone would. So I'm kind of interested in how that will be communicated, if you can go a little further into that with both people who are applying and with the general public.
The information that we will make available to those individuals who will be notified about the program and the program guidelines will reiterate all of the points, the eligibility criteria, what documents they're going to have to provide, what the intent of the use of the funds. But the ability of our department and our subcontractor to then go and look at how they use the funds once the check is cashed, we don't have that ability.
Because it's directly to them, it's not to their next landlord or next house.
No, it's directly to the individuals, and that's by the ordinance's direction.
Okay. Are there any, with where these funds are coming from, there's no concerns that somehow we'll have the funds pulled back if they're not spent on what the intention is?
No.
It's not like a different grant fund where if it weren't spent on what it was supposed to be spent on, we could end up having to repay funds. That's just completely our choice.
Are you referencing the tenant who receives the check not using it for the purpose that was in the ordinance?
Right,
or
I'm just
our
saying that
department?
sometimes when there's funds available from the city to a outside entity, if the funds were somehow used for something outside of the intended purpose, there could be an issue, but that would be most likely to happen only if it was a grant-specific, you know, program that had to be spent a certain way. And in this case, these funds are very open-ended for how they can be spent.
So when you talk about these funds, are you talking about the impacted tenant fund?
Yes.
Yes, it is. It would be money coming from, there's like no clawback on it. There is requirements that we are trying to put through the application, but not necessarily clawbacks. And I think like Ms. Russell said, you know, once a check is cash, I think right now people are definitely in a space to try to use this money for rebuilding and, you know, help, and of course fraudulent. And people always try to rig a system, but do not have time to police people at the moment who need help to be able to see if you actually spent it on housing, or did you spend it on food, or did you, you know, how did you spend it? Does not, you know, we don't have that kind of ability to do that. But when it comes to the impacted tenants fund, there's not like, it's not a grant. Yeah, it's not a grant. This is city fund. You know, 100 from ARPA, 160 from the FY.
100 of the 100,000 of the funds that were appropriated under ARPA have been committed.
Ms. Russell, could you get closer to the mic?
Sorry, the 100,000 that was committed from ARPA is going to the subcontractors' cost to implement this, do all the paperwork, cut the checks, review all of this document. For the funds that are going directly to the tenants, as per the ordinance, 160,000 has been appropriated for FY26 from fines that were collected by the building division. The Department of Human Services has submitted today to an agenda item for the June E&A meeting, an additional $100,000 that we are putting into that fund from funds that we are rolling over from our FY25 budget. Again, they are not tied to any grant. These are city funds. So we will have $260,000 to start. And as Alderman Aldridge indicated, there are no predetermined uses except
Right.
for this purpose.
And of course, I remember passing all of this. It's just always making sure that we're not putting in anything that's going to make it harder for us to verify or validate the program going further. For households, if there's more than one person in the household that's impacted and both people apply, what happens?
We are going to be looking at the entity who signed the lease and was responsible for paying the rent. And we
Okay.
will be looking at the applications to make sure there's not duplicate addresses, individuals from the same address, questioning individuals who apply. It happens all the time.
I bet it does, yeah. Okay, well, thank you so much. I appreciate this. I'm really glad that there'll be ways that you've already figured out to check the validity of the applications. Obviously, we're talking about very specific, tenants that have been impacted. As I said at the beginning of my comments, there's no shortage of people in the city of St. Louis that need help paying their rent, but with the amount of money that's available and the specific goal of this, I do want to make sure that we have ways in the city to make sure that the people who are intended to get the money are the ones who are getting it, especially now with their tornado appropriations for this. So thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to supporting this today.
Alderman Cone.
Thank you. These seem like fairly simple applications, especially for government funds. Generally speaking, when you have government funds that are being deployed or expended, there's a lot of legalese or language that's associated with the application of those funds. That doesn't seem to be present on these. That seems like it would be a concern.
The mic's on.
I'm not quite sure, Alderman Cohn, what you are referring to. Are you indicating that the application should
Has the city councilor's office reviewed the applications?
This application has been reviewed by representatives from the Board of Aldermen. It has been reviewed, and questions were taken from FEMA line items on their own budget, application, but no, it has not been reviewed to my knowledge by the city councilor's office. However, the city councilor's office has been instrumental in our development of a contract for the distribution of the funds. And so everything within the context of that contract spells out what the eligibility is for individuals as well. If you look on page 2, we do require applicants to attest to the validity of the information that they're providing to us. If you have some recommendation of other things that you would like to see on the application, we would certainly welcome receiving that information.
There are certain disclosures that are fairly commonplace on, applications, making sure that we're not discriminating, that we've, it just seems like fairly commonplace that there would be either disclosures or some sort of, I get that there's a one sentence paragraph understanding that, they're not providing false or misleading information, but, I'm happy to send a follow-up, after, I have a chance to collect my thoughts and give you some more specifics, but it seems like we would want to make sure that we're not only setting expectations, but providing the appropriate disclosures on the upfront with people as they're making these applications.
Well, I know this has been in the dry for a couple of days, Alderman Cone. So if we were to hold this, I would hope and bring this at the most next recent HUD's meeting. I would hope that, like you say, if you have any thoughts before the meeting, that would be helpful. That can be added into the application.
I mean, Alderman, this is an item for discussion. It's not a board bill that needs to be passed by this body. So I would imagine, since it's an item for discussion, that we can provide input at any point in time.
No, absolutely. I hear that, Alderman Cone. But even though it's discussion, the goal was to approve it per the ordinance. It says we have to approve the application. So just, it's not as a board bill. We would still have to approve the application. But only thing that I'm just saying, again, as I said, willing to hold it. I would just hope, I know you have history in HR, that maybe you can provide that before the next meeting so we can get that input.
I would just expect generally that if we are putting applications out for public consumption, that they would generally be reviewed by the city councilor's office before we do that. So I mean, I don't think that that's a large lift there.
This can certainly be done, and I will make certain that I make contact with the city councilor's office following this meeting, share the document with them. And again, if there's anything that you specifically want to see contained in this application, I welcome you sending that information to me. I can give you my email address following the meeting.
I mean, I know DEI is under attack right now, but having a simple disclosure in there against discriminatory practices, and reiterating the city's own non-discrimination ordinance should probably be on there.
I mean, I think the point of this application, I'm sure the city is not going to be worrying about people sexuality, race. It is mainly, this application is to see where they lived, if they were impacted by the storm, or if not, leases and information like that, not into the space of DEI, race, gender, religion, or anything in that manner.
Which is why we should reiterate it in an application, that we will not be discriminating on those practices in accordance with our own ordinances. Those are legal disclosures that are generally on applications when people are filling them out. So, also, we have in our charter, that people who are, potentially conflicted out of receiving funds, that should be something that's on the application as well, that, if they have a family member within 4 degrees of sanguinity, that they would not be eligible for the funds or have to disclose that they have that relation within city government. So, there are laws and other things that can dictate whether or not people would be the recipient of these funds that should be disclosed to set those expectations on the upfront.
And you're aware this is going to the tenants?
Correct.
Okay.
You're aware that if a tenant is a relation of someone sitting on this board, that might draw some scrutiny if they were to receive these funds, and could potentially be a conflict underneath the charter of the city of St. Louis.
I am aware of the conflict of interest requirements, not just for this fund, but again, if we utilize CDBG funds, then that could come up. I am not sure, however, what the process would be for reviewing applications and not knowing if an individual is a relative of someone who is a city employee.
That would be a good question for the application then, wouldn't it?
I agree.
Yeah, okay, thank you. We can continue the discussion further. My big thing coming into today's discussion was wondering whether or not it had actually been reviewed by the city councilor's office, as I think that there are some of the, what I'll call legalese, that might be missing from this, but if we need to approve it today, that's fine. But I think before it goes out to the general public, we need to make sure that the city councilor's office has reviewed it. Thank you.
Alderwoman Keys?
Thank you. So a couple of things, and I think Alderwoman Schweitzer may have touched on this. Oftentimes, I've experienced that there is a tenant in a location, possibly with kids, and they have a friend or a family member also with kids who is not on the lease, who is living in that dwelling, who now have also suffered a loss. So, how do you navigate something like that? The next thing, as Alderman Cone was saying, and I think this is going to be problematic because I have actually spoken to people who work for the city who are in the same situation, who also have family members who are in the same situation. Um, Myself personally, you know, what does that mean for me? You know, so all of those things I think need to be explored. This is a very unusual situation that we find ourselves in. But when we talk about the living situations that people are in, and they are varied. And like I said, I've experienced, you know, knowing people who may on Section 8, but then their sister got kicked out or wherever she was living, and now she's there with her kids too, and they're all in this Section 8 apartment. How do we deal with that? Because again, we're talking about people who have suffered a loss, right? So just because you were living with someone does not mean that you did not suffer a loss, or just because you work for the city or you have a relative who has suffered a loss doesn't mean that you didn't suffer a loss, right? You know, the storm reigneth on the just and unjust alike. You know, it hit everybody. So I think that there needs to be a broader discussion about how we navigate through this thing. And does sanguinity actually come into play when we deal with this? Because again, we have city workers who have been negatively impacted as well.
I will answer kind of the first one of you asked if you're on the lease and say you're not on the lease, but you live in the house and also suffer the loss. That was a language in the bill that not only we passed one time, but just of recent, that it is the leaseholder who would get the impacted tenants fund. It would unfortunately not be if somebody who was also living in that house, but to be able to have, I think, to try to make sure that, and in my opinion, I don't think people will take advantage of it, but I think there will be some, right? But that's not where my first thought go. But to make sure that we actually are capturing the person of that household, because maybe you moved in a month right before, and it is unfortunate, but we're trying to capture the person of the household who actually have had a year's lease and had to just uproot and move within the situation at hand.
Vice Chair Sanya?
I just wanted to start by thanking you all. I know that you guys are fielding a lot, and I can see my colleagues on the ground and what they're doing, but I can only imagine how much the workload falls departmentally, on you all. And I mean, whenever I've been to you all's office or calls, you guys have just like been a buzz and really busy. So I just want to I know it can feel like a thankless job sometimes and very difficult, and obviously none of us knew what happened. But I really appreciate your service and your staff's service and everyone coming together to do it. So I know this process might feel, a little scrutinous, but, and I know you guys are moving quickly to try to make this happen. So I'm just really appreciative of you all's efforts, and I really do see and appreciate your work. And I know that our city and our residents will appreciate your work greatly as well. I just wanted to highlight, because I don't know, obviously this application will become eligible to, to public view eventually, but I did just want to highlight that there is a section on the application or actually highlight what you talked about, Ms. Russell, when you were talking about the verification process of how we would make sure that the buildings had been properly tagged and kind of doing that. I know kind of sometimes the verification is where some of the hiccup happened with the previous previous expenditures. So I'm glad that we're going to be using verification through the Building Division of Inspections to make sure that those places are actually uninhabitable. And I did just want to make note for the public that those are basically, you know, that's the big requirement for this fund, that you have to be, the unit has to be uninhabitable in order to be eligible for this aid. I just want to make that note since folks are watching right now. I don't really have any questions except just to uplift the point. I'm not sure if it might be something you need to look into later, but if there, you know, I would say personally, tornadoes do not hit you because you are a city employee or because you are the family elected official. And I don't think that necessarily means that we can, especially if you're a city worker, I definitely don't assume that you have a ton of money sitting around. And so I don't know what special language might need to be used. You know, perhaps they have to disclose that, but don't have to be disqualified from the funding, because I'm of the opinion that if you were impacted by this tornado, if you can show us that your dwelling was hit and you meet the other criteria for the funds, that you should be able to, you know, to receive it. So I know that might take some additional work, but I just wanted to make sure that I put on record that I would like to see city employees be eligible for these funds if they were impacted. I don't want to see people be disqualified, and I don't even have a problem if necessarily one of my colleagues, I have family all across the city, and I don't think that they should be disqualified. The tornado certainly didn't disqualify them because they were a city employee or because they're related to one of us. So I just wanted to make sure that when those conversations were had with the city council or others, perhaps there's a disclosure that's required, but not a disqualification.
Thank you. And I echo that as well. Right.
We have two speakers from the public. Chris Wilcox.
Mr. Wilcox, did we swear you in when you spoke the first time? Okay, let's do it real quick. And you signed up to, okay, you all swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth? Right, please proceed.
Now, good. Yeah, so thank you for putting this together. I guess I have some guidance I could potentially allow, because I've organized several rental assistance clinics when those programs were available over the last few years. You know, and I know that you know, it always feels like you want to be safe and you want to make sure that no one is ever taking advantage, but any additional burden always goes on the least powerful person in that position, especially in something like this. I mean, just thinking of one example in one of the clinics that I helped to organize, there was someone whose application for rental assistance was denied because their landlord didn't provide verification that they owned the building. This, however, did not stop the landlord from filing for eviction, right? So the burden of proof on the landlord is often much lower than it is for the tenant. Hopefully in this case, that won't be as much of a problem if it's being paid directly to the tenant, but hopefully it doesn't require a lot of outside participation in order for them to be approved for it, because another thing I noticed through that program is that every time the refusal rate for the landlord would go up, more and more landlords refuse to participate in the program, and sometimes they're able to get around that by paying the tenant directly, but I believe in the last one that we organized, that wasn't a possibility. So, you know, just anything that makes the application more difficult, that doesn't absolutely have to be there, I would hope that we lean towards keeping it simple and making it easier for people to access. And yeah, also, yeah, hopefully that, do we have any indication of when this is going to be available? If I can ask.
We can follow up with that after.
That would be helpful, thank you. That's it.
Thank you so much, Mr. Wilcox.
The next speaker is Ms. Creighton.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm Alvonia Creighton, and I want to thank each and every one of you for your quick response to the tornado. But my concern is I want to talk about the exclusion. A lot of these tenants could possibly be multi-generations. And you're saying with the lease, say the lease is in the great-grandmother's name or a mother's name, you may have other parents. What I'm saying, families dynamics are nuanced. We really don't know. And I think trying to, look at, we don't want people to commit fraud, but I think we should be more concerned with the housing, with the unhoused count. What's the actual homeless count now? If you got 3, 4 generations in one dwelling, and you're telling me only the person on the lease can get, you're excluding other family members. And I think that should be considered. That's all I have. And thank you again for passing Impacted Tenants Funds. Have a great day.
Thank you so much, Ms. Crichton. I'm glad you brought that up because that's just additional context that I believe a lot of people may need to hear. They just don't know because they don't live it. And I don't want their comments to be misconstrued as judgmental when they're down here off of their lived experiences. But we understand that, right? And so we know that we can work together in other ways. And that's why I mentioned about the other rights and making sure that tenants know their rights in these situations so that they can get every tool in the toolbox to be able to supply what they need to move forward from this tragedy, right? that natural disaster, but prior to this, as was mentioned, some people have already been living this. So thank you so much for your comments. And Alderman Aldridge, you can proceed how you choose to.
You mind? Thank you. I appreciate the comments about the multi-generational families living in the same apartment or more than one family living in an apartment where there's only one person on the lease. I think one of the things that's really important in that point is that the fund does allow, if there is, and there might not always be, I understand that, but larger apartments that are being rented, that it's more money. So it would be up to that tenant and their family relationship to decide how they're going to break up that fund. It does not say that they could not share with the other people living in the house if they have an apartment that is, they're in the category where there's $1,400 coming to them, that would be available to share among the people in the home. It doesn't limit that. That's my understanding, right? It wouldn't prevent them from doing that. Just like I'm sure if someone is on the lease and multiple people are chipping in for that lease, it's still ending up going to the landlord for the full cost of the rent.
Yeah, again, I think definitely not trying to, and if I want to answer you to hear you right, definitely, yes, I think either this fund or another fund that may come available, once the city make the action to say, hey, you've been impacted, we're not going to then go and like police and say, don't give it to your son to, use that to go to Snooks to buy some food that only you could be able to use those dollars, or whoever was on your lease. We don't, have the ability to police every little cent and penny on the dollar. The hope would be, just like with any fund, local, state, federal, that people are actually using these funds in the right way and that we're doing what is necessary from the local level to try to provide relief to whoever is in the household, understanding that we do have to put some limitations, and that's why we stuck with just the leaseholder. But yeah, if the money was granted to Miss Dawn and her son needed to go get some food and they used that money for that, that
right. So if it's somebody who's sharing the apartment, if they're on the lease, they can distribute the money to anyone else who is in that apartment as well.
They possibly could.
Yeah, I mean, I'm saying that's a good thing. I think that gets to the questions that people have had about how are other people going to be helped out in this case. The price of the apartment is the price of the apartment, no matter what size it is that they're looking for or had.
Yes, there is no requirements once a check is cut from this or the CBG, and I maybe speaking for that. Let me not speak for that because I went for the hearing. But there's no requirement that says once the city do our requirement to make sure that the home is inhabitable and condemned and they no longer can live there, and that they showed us their lease, that they actually was a individual on that lease. Once they go through all those requirements and if a check is cut, then yes, we're trying to help them in their relief, and however they spend it is spend it. Ideally, I think they're definitely going to spend it to try to keep a roof over their head so they are not unhoused, at least with this impacted tenants fund money.
Right. And I appreciate the submission of documents is pretty simple.
Yes,
I do appreciate that for people who do need the funds, you know, being able to show the lease, the utility bill, very simple, what is being asked for in this case.
Yes, we are. I think, you know, sometimes we talk about red tape down at City Hall, and I can tell you this, that my goal is not to put more red tape in this process. I do understand we want to make sure that it is done right and that, you know, people are not misusing these funds. But some of the disclosure stuff that was said earlier, I'm not, don't really got the energy for. I think the application documentations that we have laid out, which is also in the legislation. I appreciate everybody for voting for that again. In that bill, I think is enough, but I do think there does need to be one edit in an era that Ms. Valerie did bring up, especially as there was an opportunity for more funds as we was moving this legislation before that, which I think is a clean edit that we can make.
Right, and that's another ARPA lesson, I think, from the past is when applications change multiple times, and, you know, if it's the board's fault or if it's the result of a program changing, if we have to come back and make edits, it does make it harder on the applicants, especially if it delays the funds. So I appreciate that forethought. That's really smart. So thank you for entertaining all of my questions. I know that we all come from different places, but I think at the end of the day, we all want to make sure the money gets to the people who need it the most. So thank you.
I had one question.
Alderwoman Keys.
So my concern is this, is that I would think that we would be collecting some demographic information, and this application doesn't capture that. If we talk about what is our real number of homelessness or how the storm has impacted people of a certain age, people of a gender, you know, I would think that those things might be built in to the application. How many children within a household?
That's on the application.
Oh, it is? I'm sorry.
Yes,
I
and the demographics that you talk about is also on the application.
Right. But I would also agree with Alderman Cone when we talk about discrimination. And you know, we're certainly hoping that this wouldn't be a problem, but I think that it is important that it is addressed.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Syed.
I don't, you know, I don't have any further commentary. When you all were talking, I was just thinking of a family that I did a delivery to was actually a pregnant woman, and she was still staying within the home, and there was tarp on it and a lot of wetness within her unit because it was, it had obviously had been raining. And so I think about somebody like that relocating. I think the difference is when the impacted tenants fund were first done, at least in my mind, I wasn't thinking of people who had lost everything. So to me, it makes sense to really limit it directly to specific housing costs like rent or deposit. Now, after a tornado, when everything is gone, you know, I do think it should be used for housing, but I think just when you've lost everything within your home, the housing need is a little bit more expansive. I can see like that being an early conversation. We're talking about, you know, did people spend the money right? I'm not really sure after a natural disaster when everything within your house is ruined, all your clothing, all your furniture, all your food is gone, exactly what that means, because all those things are connected to housing. So I just wanted to make sure that I put on record that I think, you know, that those are needs that I think have to be met. And, you know, I'm not angry and I don't care to like police someone in that way of, did you go and get a bed for it's, you know, instead of a, you know, and I don't really know like what it looks like to do that, but I think it's important that we really put ourselves in a position, and some of us one of us is in that position where, have experienced losing things in our home. But I think when we design an application and go back and especially try to think of like the reporting processes and what are like kind of worthy expenditures, that we really keep in mind that these funds are for people who have lost everything. And so not only have they been evicted, you losing their housing, but everything within their home is gone. And I'm not mad at a mom who might decide to buy a crib. I'm not mad at a father who might decide to buy his child's clothes. I'm not upset at that. So I just wanted to make sure that I put that on record for when you all go back and as we continue to have these conversations, especially about this fund, on what it looks like to support people where everything, their housing and everything within their housing is damaged or gone.
Well, I missed the last, I think, 2 votes, but I think with the funds that I just talked to Ms. Valerie, that those previous bills, there's going to be a lot of funds coming to try to do everything. And the previous bill also addressed using those funds for household assistance. So whatever that is for your household to have that assistance, that it, as Alderwoman mentioned earlier, there's all these avenues out here, and this avenue for the Impacted Tenants Fund will try to address some part of the housing. No, it's not everything, and we passed 2 bills that's also going to address more part of the housing. And then, hopefully Friday, we'll introduce a bill that addresses even more part of housing, but I definitely agree with you.
Well, I know some people have concerns, so it's up to you how you want to move forward. We play a specific role in this and any legislation or programming or funding. The Board of Aldermen plays a specific role in that, and then it goes on to others to play their role in it. And when you're down here with the spirit of wanting to help people, then your mind wants progress in it without some of the unintentional consequence and disruption. So you just let us know what you want to do. In either way, we'll be ready.
Yeah, I would say not necessarily the great thing about it, but I think that we are lucky enough because the program is still being set up that at least with some of the positive, constructive feedback that was granted today could be implemented. I do know there is one change that we do need to add that as we was doing the application fell off, which is an easy fix that I believe that we could bring back Tuesday and to be able to get this passed so that we can actually start to set this process up. I'm in the same headspace with my colleagues. We definitely want to make sure we get it right, and I totally agree. But also, I think like my resident said, Mr. Wilcox, I'm also not trying to put too much red tape where it makes it hard for people to actually access these funds. So I appreciate everybody's comments. And since this was a discussion, I will hold this for the next time we meet at HUD's to discuss again.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there any written testimony?
We have none.
Any announcements? All right, I'd like to excuse Alderman Browning for necessary absence. And with that, I'll accept the motion to adjourn.
Second.
It's moved by Alderman Cone, seconded by Alderwoman Keys. We are all in favor. I'm sure it's aye, and we are adjourned. Everyone have a blessed evening.
Oh, no. No. I'd have been